Today we're here with James Burk. He is the executive director of the Mars Society. We're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to talk about the conference that we just had a couple week and a half ago down in Arizona. We're going to talk about what's new and what's next. Before we get into that, the program kind of unfolds where we get into a little bit of people's history and background, because I feel like that's often not known. And rather than give everyone a dry, dull, artificial bio that we create, that we read off, with this new format, we're really trying to get into the people of the business as we're getting into the finance, capitalization, and operations of space. So with that, we're going to jump in first with an introduction, a long introduction with him for about 10 minutes or so. And then we're going to start getting into the core topics. This is not going to be a normal hour-long program that we often do. We're really focused on, we're going to try and get it done in about 30 minutes, 40 minutes or so. All right. With that, really great to have our friend James Burk here.
Yeah, good to be with you, Michael.
Thank you. Good to see you. We just put in an awful lot of work down in the desert of Arizona. So before we get into that, let's go a little bit into your background. You've been at this job for not quite officially a year now. And unless you've been in the Mars Society for the long haul, most people don't know who you are. So give us a little bit of background. Who are you? How'd you get to the Mars? How'd you become a Martian? Just a little bit of background.
Yeah, absolutely. So the job that you're referring to is the executive director of the Mars Society. So I joined the Mars Society back when it got started, actually, in 1998. I'm a founding member. I was the head of the Seattle chapter. And at that time, I was a young man working at Microsoft as a technical project manager. And I did that for about 20 years and also did a lot of consulting in the last 10 years. But I joined full-time at the Mars Society about a year ago. It was December of last year, after a process that happened because we got a very large donation from Blue Origin's Club for the Future of $1 million. And so that enabled the Mars Society to bring on a full-time executive director for the first time. And I was fortunate enough to be the candidate they picked. And so I got started with space advocacy when I was in my early days in my career. I just graduated from college, started working at Microsoft as a college hire, and found out about the Mars Society. Also was involved with National Space Society at the time, and another one called the Moon Society, which grew out of an earlier group called the Artemis Society. And the Artemis Society was the one I actually heard about first. It was in 1996. I was watching TV in my college apartment, and it was my junior year in college. And so this Discovery Channel program came on with Gillian Anderson called Future Fantastic. And they talked about these lunar renegades that are going to settle the moon with the private sector funding it. And that project.
What year would this be?
1996.
1996. All right.
So that project didn't work out for them, for that group of people, but I went on and I met a lot of them. And I also, for many years, worked with the Moon Society up until last year. That was one of the areas of just learning how to be a space advocate for me that really helped a lot. But the Mars Society, I've been involved since the beginning. It's their 25th year as an organization. We've had our conference every year. We also have our Utah station as our flagship project, the Mars Desert Research Station, which you can see behind me. It's an analog research station where people come in and spend 2 weeks and they practice living and working on Mars. And it's a really important program. It's one that we are really proud of. We've had over 1,500 crew members go through it, over 280 crews in the last 20 years. And we also have a station up in the Arctic called the Flashline Mars Arctic Research Station. And so I'm sure we'll get to talking about that in a bit, but that kind of represents the big projects we do at the Mars Society.
Let's stick with your personal story a little bit further. You said you worked at Microsoft for quite a while, and you've been volunteering for a while. How does that get you qualified to become the executive director of the Mars Society? Like, what are some of the steps that you took, successes and failures that got you here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, what qualified me the most was the last 4 years of working on a couple different projects that raised money for the Mars Society. One was Mars VR, our virtual reality project, and I led 2 successful crowdfunding campaigns for that, where we raised over $130,000 for that project. I also did, as a consultant working in the private sector, I was a nonprofit management consultant, and so I had several clients in the last couple of years where I helped them with their nonprofit management strategies, some of their technology. For example, I helped the Catholic Community Services of Western Washington set up a volunteer tutor database and tracked attendance for their tutors that help low-income students in Seattle.
Cool.
And I also worked on another nonprofit called African American Reach and Teach Health Ministries, helped them with setting up some digital assets, digital surveys, and other things that, they were more of a sort of an analog organization with a file cabinet full of records and trying to go digital. So it gave them some strategy on that. So those were the immediate things that helped me be an executive director. What helped me with Mars is just my passion for it. I mean, I was a young man in college when the Mars Pathfinder mission landed on Mars in '97, and I was like glued to my television watching that and learning as much as I could about what JPL was doing. I actually got the opportunity to meet Rob Manning a couple of years ago, and he's now the chief engineer at JPL. But back then, he was in charge of the entry, descent, and landing for Pathfinder. So he was the engineer that designed the aeroshell, the aeroshell and airbag approach that landed Pathfinder, but also Spirit and Opportunity on Mars. Yep. So that kind of thing just was really inspiring to me, to see us get back to doing real space exploration beyond Earth orbit.
I really remember that. That was the first thing that broke the internet, right? That was millions and millions of people were tuned into that. It actually overwhelmed most servers because it was the first time where going to Mars was up close and personal, and all you had to do was log into a NASA server to watch it. It was quite astounding. I was not really keyed into space yet at that point. I was still working on an internet company back in those days, and so it was a blip on my radar, but it wasn't my driving passion. So really, you were one of the earliest pioneers in this whole field.
Well, back then I was just a spectator. I mean, I was a tech person in college. I learned how to design websites. For example, in 1994, I actually did a website for the Jacksonville Jaguars football team as a fan, and they wrote me up in the newspaper as this enterprising 19-year-old college student. But so I was a tech guy, so I knew what they were doing with Pathfinder and putting all the information online. They would get images back from Mars and put it on the website, and people were downloading it. And I remember trying to download the Super Pan, which was, a couple of megabytes, which was a lot back then.
It was a lot then, yeah.
Download. So, it was kind of, it's a long time ago, but that was the first time where we really had a digital space mission that everybody was interested in. Now you see people going gaga over the photos from the James Webb Space Telescope, and it's kind of the same thing. They're downloading photos and looking at them. Back then we would download stuff, and they had like the 3D glasses with the red and blue lenses, which I remember when I was a kid, they would have like movies on basic TV where they were 3D, and you'd have your glasses that you get from the gas station. And so you were doing that with like the Mars pictures from the rovers and trying to see the terrain, kind of the undulating terrain at the Pathfinder landing site. But yeah, that was, kind of the bridge between analog and digital is what we were witnessing there.
Brilliant. Brilliant. What would be some of the things that, you would advise people if, to not make a particular mistake or maybe an error in your career that you learned a lesson from? What would that lesson be? What would that error be? The reason I bring that up is because everyone always wants to talk about, the successes, but, having been a guy who has stumbled several times, I think you really learn some important lessons from the errors. So where's an area maybe you misstepped?
Well, for me, I got a computer science degree, a business and computer science degree, because I knew I wanted to work in the tech industry. I wanted to work at Microsoft growing up. And so for me, that was my best preparation to work there. The way it turned out, what I studied at my college, University of Florida, was not what I ended up using when I worked at Microsoft. I learned things like assembly language programming and mainframe, management and things like that. And that really, and COBOL, COBOL was great in the year 1999 because people were getting jobs fixing Y2K bugs. But that was about it. That was a very limited, career move for someone to learn COBOL at that time. So when I got to Microsoft, like there was a whole other set of technologies and processes and working in a big corporation that I was just really unprepared for. So if I had to do it all over again, I think I probably would have gotten an engineering degree or gotten some type of more, hands-on thing in college, where I could get more hands-on experience at a job than what I did. Because what I did was very sort of academic computer science. I think the only thing that really helped back then was I learned about databases, and then that did apply because I did work on pretty sophisticated database projects later in my career, and some of that knowledge helped me. But that was about it. Like 90% of everything else was useless for me. And so in the tech industry, there's plenty and like the best developers, some of them never went to college. They're just savants. Right. They're just people that they know how to learn, they know how to pick things up, and they're creative thinkers and creative problem solvers. And really the technology is secondary when you have that approach. And so for me now, with over 20 years of experience in my belt, that's how I feel too. The technology is less important than just trying to solve the problem that you're trying to solve. And there's always multiple solutions to a problem. And so you need to factor in all the different factors when you choose what the best solution is. So, but yeah, if I had to do it again, and I've told this to some of our students recently at the high school program I ran for the Mars Society last summer, is like take a hard look at being a mechanical or electrical or some other type of engineer, because if you have an engineering degree and you can get licensed in your state, that's basically you have a job for the rest of your life, because you can do lots of stuff with that.
Very cool. Very cool. So let's kind of move towards Mars. Let's move towards the Mars Society now. For the folks that weren't the 450 people that made it to Arizona, let's talk about the conference that you just completed, highlights from that, and then let's start talking about your new programs and the money behind it. All right?
Yeah, sounds great. So the conference was a great success. We have our conference every year. This was the first time we've had it since the pandemic. So normally, back in 2019, for example, we had our conference at USC in Southern California, and there was about 300 people there, and we thought it was very successful. We had 4 days of programming. We had speakers like Greg Autry and a lot of the JPL team. Paul Wooster was there from SpaceX, and that was our normal sort of successful conference back in that era that we did for 18 years before that or so. More than that, actually, 22. Then when the pandemic happened, we had to pivot, and so Robert said to me, let's do our whole conference online. How do we do that, James?
Founder of Mars Society, because not everybody knows who Robert is. So Robert Zubrin's Founder of Mars.
Robert Zubrin's the founder and president of the Mars Society, very well known in the space community. He's the guy that wrote the book about how to get to Mars cheaply with modern technology. And he started the Mars Society because he was trying to make it happen. He was trying to make humans to Mars happen. And 25 years later, we've really moved the needle with the Mars movement, I believe. So, yeah. But anyway, we started planning out the virtual conference 2 years ago, and we held that in 2020, and it was a great success. We had 10,000 attendees. We also got everyone we asked to speak. They all said yes because it was virtual. So we got Elon Musk, we got the NASA administrator Jim Bridenstine, we got several other folks that the who's who basically of JPL and all the rover teams and the science teams at NASA that work on Mars. And so that was great. And we repeated that conference format again last year. And then so for this year, we were going to go back to in-person, but we were going to do it as a hybrid event. So not just the in-person, 2019 style conference with 300 or 400 people, but also have all the virtual attendees and have virtual presenters too. So it's really 4 ways. It's virtually attending, watching on Zoom, being in person, and then also the people that are on stage in Arizona, you could see them on Zoom or listen to them in person. And then you have virtual speakers like Peter Beck, which spoke at our conference virtually. So that's really like organizing 2 conferences. As you know, Michael, it was a lot to pull together, but we made it happen. The conference this year was very successful. The early numbers are we had 400 people in person, which was our cap. We were capped at 400 because of the facilities we were at Arizona State University. But then we had about 3,000 to 5,000 watching online, and it was fantastic. We were featured on the top of space.com all 4 days with our live stream, and all of our virtual talks happened. And we're in the process now of getting everything up on YouTube, but a lot of it was recorded during the live stream and can be watched right now on our YouTube channel. So yeah, we really feel good about the conference. We had speakers like Pam Milroy, the Deputy Administrator of NASA. We had Peter Beck. We had Dr. James Bell from ASU, who's the designer of the rover camera on Curiosity and Perseverance, and he gave an update on those missions. We had Dr. Marcia Reinke from the James Webb Space Telescope give an update on that. Greg Autry spoke. We had Bhavya Lal from NASA headquarters, who's the Deputy Associate Administrator for Nuclear Propulsion Concepts at NASA, and she talked about nuclear power for Mars, which was a first, I think, for NASA to come out and talk about that publicly. So yeah, we feel really good. And then the Saturday evening speakers were Michael Edmonds, who's the president of the Club for the Future at Blue Origin, also the SVP of marketing for Blue Origin, and then also Aaron Bold from Mongolia. So there's this really interesting organization in Mongolia that's our chapter there now. They're called Mars V, and they get funding from the Prime Minister's office in Mongolia, and they're a very large organization that's focused on humans to Mars. And they're building a analog research station that we're going to partner with them on in the Gobi Desert, and it's going to be a nomadic analog station. It's a station where between each crew you can actually pick it up and move it to another location, kind of building off of the heritage of that part of the world.
Right. And
so we're very excited about that partnership. And Aaron Bold gave a great presentation, very impressive presentation that showed video of Robert visiting Mongolia and meeting with all the officials there. And out in the desert and seeing, scouting out locations for the analog mission we're going to conduct with them next May. So it was a really good conference overall. Everything, for the most part, went really well. And all the feedback I've gotten was positive from the attendees. So pretty happy with how everything went this year.
On a personal note, I was one of the first people on my feet for a standing ovation for the Mongolian team because I was amazed. I was in shock. I'm not surprised in the space community very often. And you had mentioned it on our prior show, on our prior episode of Better Futures, but I really had no idea. And candidly, I was skeptical. And then after their presentation, I'm like, this this effort could be really significant, like really, really significant in the world. So I was so impressed by that. All right, so you mentioned the Club for the Future, and you mentioned that the reason that the society has a full-time executive director now, you. So talk about the money. How is that? How is the society been funded up till now? How does that change going forward? What are your hopes and dreams and expectations, for 2023, 24, and 25? I know I
Right.
just threw a lot at you there. Yeah.
No, that's fine, because that's what my job is as executive director, is to be on top of our fundraising and managing our money well. And as a nonprofit, we need to be smart about our money, right? Every dollar we get is a dollar someone gave us to go do humans to Mars, so we should spend that dollar wisely, and we try to. So the donation from Blue Origin, we kind of see as an endowment. The majority of that money has not been spent. So there's rumors out there that the Mars Society is just hemorrhaging money. I can tell you those rumors are completely false. I have. We are not. We're very solvent. We basically, if you look at our 2019 tax return, all of our tax returns are public because we're a nonprofit. We file every year. But we were in 2019. We're about a $400,000 a year organization. That was our operating expenses, and the majority of that was running our research stations.
Right.
The majority of that is just operating the MDRS through our full field season, where we have 12 to 15 crews, and all that entails. You asked, how do we normally get most of our money before the Blue Origin grant? Most of the time over the last 25 years, it's been through individual donations. Okay. So the vast majority of our funding comes from individuals. Some of those individuals are high net worth and give bigger donations than others. But for the most part, we're funded by individual small donations, and we sell memberships. We have over 1,500 members worldwide that are active right now. Each of those is paying either $50 for a normal membership per year or $25 for students and seniors. That's a huge part of our operating income. And then also we have a small number of grants that over the years we've gotten. So we've gotten grants from NASA, through the Space We're Bound program. We currently have a grant from the Utah Space Grant Consortium that helps operate the station in Utah. But that's a very small fraction of the money we get. I mean, most of the money is through individual donations. In the past, 20 years, there's been a couple times where corporations have rented the MDRS to do things like commercial shoots or other projects. That's a little bit of money that comes in as well. And then way back in the day, when we built the Flashline station, we sold the naming rights of the station to a .com called Flashline.com. Right. And so we actually are looking at doing that again in the near future, to generate some more money. So when I look at my job as executive director, and I've taken some courses on what normal nonprofit operations are, normal, being a nonprofit, not like the Mars Society, where we have this huge grassroots amount of support traditionally. Normal nonprofits will raise funding through annual giving, through capital campaigns, where they're like maybe raising money to purchase a building or start a new program that they've never done before. And it's usually like a one-time big fundraising push. And then there's also things like planned giving, so kind of soliciting to high net worth individuals, to give when they pass as part of their estate planning. Right. We've never done anything like that. We've actually, there's been anecdotes I've heard where we've actually been unable to meet those. We've had people come to us and want to do that, and we weren't able to close the loop on that. Wow. So that's an area that I really want to make sure we have dialed up, and we can support if people come to us and want to do that, want to have a planned gift as part of their estate planning, and then also ramping up our grant processes, like looking out for grants that match what we would need for our stations and other projects, and applying for those grants, and building relationships with the grant making organizations. There's a lot of foundations in the U.S., for example, that give money for STEM education. And
Right.
so like that's a great opportunity for us to go out there and talk to those organizations and see if we can get small grants from them for our education programs, for example.
So you said that the budget in 2019 was around 400,000 or so.
And I use that example just because of the pandemic, because
That's-
obviously things were different the last 2 years. We were
Sure.
operating
Yeah,
on a much smaller scale during
Yeah.
the pandemic. We only had a couple crews in 2020, for example.
Right. Right.
So now this year we're getting more back to normal, but I look at 2019 as sort of that's when everything was, going normally for us. So
Right. A baseline that we can use to kind of, establish what happens next. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So you've kept most of this money from the Club for the Future, $1 million, mostly in, I'm going to say escrow. I don't know if that's the right term. It's probably a higher yield asset, but it's
essentially
stable.
an escrow,
Yeah.
We're not using it on any speculative investments, for example.
Right. No, of course not. So, all right. So that's kind of where you are. Most of your operating budgets come in from other individuals. You just did the math. 1,500 people at $50 is only $75,000. So that's only a portion of your membership. Only covers a portion of your budget.
Right.
So I could see how people are wondering about hemorrhaging money. Obviously, that's not true, and we both know that's not true.
I think one of the reasons they say that is just because we do so much stuff.
Right.
But we do it with volunteers. Like almost everyone that works with the Mars Society is a volunteer.
Right.
And we've been able to really do amazing things with volunteers. Like the conference we just were part of. I mean, we had 30 volunteers.
Yeah.
That's how we did it, And so people, I think, don't really realize the power of well-managed volunteer groups, what they can do with a very small amount of money.
Well, I'm going to take a moment and do a shout out to Carrie and Leah, because they certainly did an awful lot at before, during, and I presume after the event. Your Leah just got a Volunteer of the Year award, and I know that the whole thing would collapse around us if Carrie wasn't doing her job. So
you're talking about Carrie Fay, who's the administrative director of the Mars Society. She's she's a fantastic person and been the rock solid core of the Mars Society for over 10 years now.
Yeah. So you do a lot with not spending a lot of money. So that's a pretty Spartan way of approaching things. Excellent, because there's no expectation that. Well, no, I'm going to ask the question. There's no expectation that there's another $1 million sitting on the edges somewhere, right? That's not how you operate.
No, I mean, we don't operate that way. We try to operate as if we're going to go do something, we're going to figure out how to pay for it ahead of time and fundraise for that. We're not going to rely on just spending money with no plan of how to recover that or sustain that program. Really, it's about sustainability. If we're going to go down the path of doing something, we don't want it to just be a one-off. We want to, make commitments and do it annually, and that's typically what we do with our large programs. So, like for example, the VR project was new 5 years ago, but we've steadily made progress for 5 years now, and we're going to continue to.
So let's talk about the programs that are in place now and what you have on the near-term horizon.
Mm-hmm.
What are those programs? What do you expect to accomplish from them? And how much do they cost? And where's that money coming from?
Yeah, so I mentioned the Mars Desert Research Station. That's our largest program that operates in a field season that runs October through May. So we just started the new field season. The first crew just finished up, and the second crew is about to go into sim, I believe, today. That'll run for the next few months, next 6 to 9 months, and then we'll Then we'll basically shut down for the summer and do a retrofit at the end of the field season and the beginning of next one. And that's where we spend a little bit of money to improve the station as well. So for that program, as I mentioned, we fund it through individual donations, we fund it through crew fees and a couple of grants, small grants. We are going to do a crowdfunding campaign for the Mars Desert Research Station very soon. It's something I've been putting together with my team. And so that'll also help boost our improvement budget, because we would like to make some improvements to the outer hull of the station and some other things, some upgrades as well. So so that's an example of us kind of doing a little extra fundraising to make something happen for one of our projects. But overall, it is a sustainable project. We've been able to successfully run it for 20 years now. We also have the Flashline Mars Arctic Research Station. That one, we don't send a crew there every year because it is very expensive, as you can imagine, to mount an expedition to the Arctic. It costs over $100,000 for one crew. So the last time we were there was in 2017. We had a crew that spent 80 days at the MDRS and planned to spend 80 days in the Arctic. So it was called the Mars 160 crew. And we're planning to do another mission next year. We're already talking to some potential teams that might be part of that. And we're telling all of them that part of them being selected to be on a crew to Flashline is being able to fundraise and help us fund that mission, which we estimate will cost between 120 to 200K. And so that's
so the team has to fundraise that, or is that their portion or the total?
That's the total that the team needs to assist us in fundraising for.
Okay, so they don't have to come up with the whole 150. It's going to be, they do some, you do some, they do some, you do some.
Well, possibly, we'll see. So
Okay.
We're still early on this because this is next summer, and there's certainly a lot of interest, but we currently don't have the funds to mount that in that program line item. So that'll be part of the activities of planning for that mission. And we don't think it's going to be hard to raise that much, by the way, for that mission.
Right. You've been doing this for 20 years with the site in Utah. You certainly know how to operate this. And certainly you've got the visibility and the credentials to back up, to justify the expense. Yeah. So that's exciting.
Yeah. And those two stations represent our analog research program. So it's we're part of a worldwide analog research, a community or collective of these stations. Now we built the first two of these, but there's many of them out there now around the world. There's one in Iceland, there's one in Hawaii, there's several in Europe. They're working on one in Australia, actually, that we're part of. And also the Mongolia team we mentioned, they're also an analog station, or at least they're going to be next year. So that program of research is also very important to the Mars Society. Like, we want to make sure that we're maintaining a leadership role in what that community is doing. And the name of the game is, let's get ready for humans on Mars. I mean, the research theme for both of our stations is the human factors, the operational challenges, the human operational challenges of living and working on Mars.
Right.
And so, part of maintaining a leadership role, to me, means that we have research objectives that we are talking to folks about. And so the crews we select are part of the research objectives that fit into what we're trying to do. Because each individual crew that comes to one of our stations has their own science mission, their own experiments they're going to run, but we want all that to fit together into a theme of operational challenges. So a lot of people, when I describe to them for the first time what we do at the Utah station, they assume we're like literally using the hardware you use on Mars and we're just testing it out, and so we're not actually doing that. We don't have $1 million spacesuits and $500 million ISRU gear, because that really doesn't exist yet. Right. What we are doing is simulating that. We're simulating what it's like to have a crew of 6 to 8 people work on Mars for 2 weeks and explore large areas of Mars. That's what we're operationally doing. We have people gear up in simulated spacesuits that go out in rovers and go kilometers away from the station and come back. That's what we're trying to practice. So,
for those that don't know, many years ago, my team went down to MDRS and brought our high altitude balloons with robots tethered back and the robots were climbing back and forth on the tether up there. And the point of that was to basically be a mobile mast for a communications relay. We called it tethered towers. So we went out there, gosh, it should have been in 2004 or 2005. So that's been something they've been working on for years, different technologies, different systems. GIS, geographic information systems, have come a whole long way in the 20 years since the last time we were out there. So it is important. It's important work. And that's just me doing the one thing that I know of back out there. So
one of the things that I'm working on is using our VR project,
right,
to do a field science demo where we actually have someone out in the field that's maybe looking for rock samples or biological samples, and they can actually work real time and collaboratively with someone in VR in the hab. So the person in VR would actually be able to guide them through the terrain and help them and support them with what they're trying to do out in the field. And there'd be data transfer back and forth between the two so that they would be able to see vitals and other metrics, but also like the science objectives and the map coordinates and taking notes of what you're seeing, and labeling samples and things like that digitally. So it's a really interesting project. We have a few people at the Mars Society helping me out with that, and that's one example of us trying to really drive the research approaches forward for field science at the station.
Well, and also make it accessible to folks, right?
Right.
The backers of those campaigns had access to stuff. You've publicized it on the website. Like, there's a lot of ways that you try to, I'll say, democratize the research that you're doing, to share it with other folks. I think I've always really admired that.
Yeah, we've had over 1,000 research papers been written by people that have gone through the MDRS. And so we're really proud of that.
Is there any sort of library or collection for all that, or is it?
We're working on that. That's a question that comes up a lot.